Players, partiers, market participants. I'm Shaun Riney, and this is the New York City Multifamily Podcast. Today, we will be joined by Christina Smyth and Alex Fotopoulos, two lawyers that specialize in New York City real estate, often representing multifamily owners, operators, and management companies. Christina is also a distinguished owner representative on the incredibly important New York City Rent Guidelines Board. Alex practices law with a particular emphasis on rent regulatory issues and matters concerning DHCR. As always, I will be joined by my partners and co-hosts, Joe Koicim and Seth Glasser. Let's get this started.
Welcome, everyone, to the New York City Multifamily Podcast. Good to see everyone. Christina Smyth, Joe Koicim, Alex Fotopoulos, Shaun Riney. Welcome back.
What's up, baby?
How we doing,
everybody?
I know. I can't believe we got these guys on here. So thank you.
Deal maker attorneys, by the way.
I know.
In the legal
Hopefully
trenches.
I
We're
know.
here to litigate in the court of podcast opinion.
I know. So why don't we go right into it before they change their mind about being on the record here with us? So, Christina, I want to start with you because you were most recently at the RGB hearings about 3 weeks ago or so.
Yes.
And we saw some footage of that, and it looked like WrestleMania. So why don't you tell us what happened?
Yes. So I had the pleasure of being appointed by the mayor to the Rent Guidelines Board a couple of years ago, and it's been smooth sailing until some city council people decided to storm the stage at one of our public meetings. I'm a big proponent of democracy. I like public hearings and I like everyone's opinion to be heard, but there could have been a higher level of decorum in our
It seemed like it was
proposals.
pretty staged, huh? It was planned.
Yeah, I realize now that we were under attack. I mean, no two ways about it. They wanted to get their point across. It's an election year.
Was it scary? I mean, were you viscerally
Listen,
shook up
I'm
from that?
tough.
I didn't know you were tough.
Okay.
I know you're tough. And so are your bodyguards.
It was alarming. I have hired private security at this point now.
No, but it looked like genuinely a little scary.
I was alarmed.
Yeah.
I was alarmed. I mean, it was the number of people. But again, come one, come all. We have lots of good data to support a landlord's need for increases. And
Right.
so I was hired, appointed and hired as an advocate to
Right.
speak for landlords. Net operating income is down for the fourth consecutive year by big numbers.
Walk me through how this board works. Is it somewhat like the Supreme Court? There's 9 members, there's 2 tenant advocates, 2 landlord advocates, and there's 5 that are public advocates in the middle, and Mayor Adams or the mayor at the time appoints how many of them and how often do they get to appoint them? What's the term?
Everyone is appointed by the sitting mayor. There were some de Blasio members who the mayor has now interviewed and replaced. But you're right, there are 4 public members plus the chair. The chair is new from Fordham Law School, esteemed Professor Nestor Davidson, our new chair. And we really are very data driven. We look at RPIE filings, we look at income and expense statements that landlords provide, we look at testimony that tenants provide, and the a banker came and talked about the distress that these 100-year-old buildings are suffering under. And year over year, the increases don't nearly meet what the demands are to operate multifamily buildings.
And the expenses have gone up tremendously, right? Insurance, real estate
Right.
taxes.
So then what happened? So the data supported 8% on 1 year and 16% on 2 year, and then it was whittled down to 2 to 5 and 4 to 7% ranges on the preliminary ranges. So what happens in between those two?
So there was a lot of downward pressure on the proposed increases, mostly because I think that there are tenants who are struggling, right? Everyone knows that rent is everyone's largest expense. Everyone in this room probably, that is our largest, because our housing is our largest expense. And, I think the goal of the board is to make adjustments. We don't make increases, we make adjustments. And we're also not really a board that promotes affordability of housing. It's a board that promotes sustainability of housing. And there was downward pressure on what the board thinks is appropriate for this year. So we have a 2 to 5% range. Obviously, the landlord reps are pushing for the higher end of the range, and that's on a 1-year lease, and we have a different range for a 2-year lease, and there'll be some public hearings, and we'll get to.
Right,
Should we
And
place
so
any
how is
bets?
the-
Where do we think we're going to end up?
How does the final vote work, though? Is it just like you just send in
We
the
make
number
a
you think?
proposal, and obviously our proposal is going to be the highest end of the range. The tenants, you'll hear, or you may have heard, put a proposal of a rent rollback,
Right.
which, listen, they think our proposal is preposterous. We think theirs is preposterous. We will likely trend higher than what we were able to achieve last year. Remember, under de Blasio, there were 6 consecutive years of very low, almost 0%.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
the aggregate was somewhere between, I think, a 6% over 7 years, which is just unsustainable.
Yeah, it's
Right.
startling when you look at the history. It's like, what business can sustain itself with
Yeah.
no increase in
Yeah.
revenue for a 6 to 7 time period, let alone decrepit apartment
Well,
buildings?
the effective rents actually, if you factor in inflation, actually went down,
100%.
right? So the initial advice, the initial proposal comes out in like low teens or something like that, right? On the 1 and 2 years, and then you guys get together and basically negotiate, the 9 of you. Is
Yes.
that how it works,
That's
right?
exactly how it works.
Okay.
And we listen to public testimony, and we hear from more experts. Some landlords come and they give their opinion, and we get to a final vote.
Okay, so the public testimony I think is really interesting, and I know Chip is really outspoken about this, where you can go and testify. You were there for a few hours and you heard a lot of public testimony. Am I speaking out of turn? Did you not?
So the last public meeting was really more shouting and fist raising.
By tenants.
By tenants. And typically when the landlords come, the brave landlords who come are drowned out and their voice is not heard at all. So there's no equanimity at all.
Yeah, they're really outnumbered.
It's really outnumbered. In fact, there was a request by Chip that the landlords who do want to come and speak, the smaller landlords, the bigger landlords, any landlord who wants to come and speak should come to the virtual hearing so that their voice is actually heard. I am not in favor of closing down the meetings because it's government.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's democracy. I am in favor of civility, so we're going to try to promote that for the next time.
Well, we thank you for the work that you're doing. We know,
Thank you.
It's not an easy job. It's not a glamorous job necessarily, but hopefully Mayor Adams appoints more commonsensical minded nominees to the board.
Would you do it again?
I mean, I'm serving
Yeah,
at the
signed
pleasure
up,
of the
right?
mayor.
Life
Yeah,
So
there we
sentence.
go.
No.
as long as the mayor is our
Alex, we
mayor.
got to get you on there too.
I'm here. I'm here.
You're-
I'd love to.
you're our
I'd love
next
to.
Manchurian
I don't mind,
candidate.
Christina.
We could try to work him in as a public member.
So the
Ooh.
two of you have known each other a long time, right? And colleagues, sometimes on the other side of the table, or most of the time. Do you always agree?
I don't think any two lawyers always agree.
All the brokers agree.
Well, that's different. You guys are all motivated by money. You guys are all
What are you motivated by?
My clients. But, no, I think, Christina and I find ourselves on the opposite side of a lot of deals. And I think, depending on which side you're on, you might want to be more or less aggressive. But, I think that this is an evolving area of the law, Joe, and it's very hard, cases change really day to day, especially in the area of J51, area of deregulation. And it's very hard to counsel clients because what you may have told them 2-3 years ago is not necessarily what the law is today.
Right. Well, they keep changing the rules as we're all playing the game. So who's going to stop that? Christina,
But
you
there
gonna have them
has
stop
been
this?
some court cases, and I wanted to touch
Yeah.
upon this because as brokers, what we struggle with the most is getting a buyer through due diligence, going from a business decision to a risk decision. And that's where we honestly butt heads with attorneys because they're there to protect their client against from lightning striking. And I'm trying to, see the forest through the trees, not focus on a blade of grass. And sometimes that, runs counterintuitive to that relationship. But one of the things I think that's overlooked in the marketplace, and I'm curious, the opinion of the guests is, how often Regina Court of Appeals decision is cited. And what I mean by that is Regina Court of Appeals, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially said, you're guilty until proven innocent within that 6-year look back, but you're kind of innocent until proven guilty 6 years and beyond. Because when I was on the up and up in 2008 to 2015, let's say, you were not required to keep records of how you deregulated a unit. You were told to destroy them after 4 years. So the 2023 email that I get about how to find records when Bill Clinton was in the White House seems a little bit to not comport with the law. And this idea that you can be penalized in the future for following the law at the time was essentially what I thought Regina Court of Appeals decided, but yet there is this idea that you can pierce fraud and pierce that 6-year look back. So I'm just curious, Alex, if you want to go first, like how do you advise clients when a unit was deregulated 10 years ago, but the client doesn't have records?
Well, it's funny that you asked that. I was before a Supreme Court justice yesterday, and I was having this argument with him. And, the regulatory status of an apartment is subject to challenge at any time. And I think that's pretty black letter at this point. And I'm not sure that Regina really changed that facet of the law. I think you do need to go back to the deregulation. The starting point for proving a deregulation is always the registered deregulation. Now, I'm not sure that the law before Regina or before 2019 necessarily told you to throw your records away, but what it did tell you was there's a 4-year look-back period. So the question is, what happens when you don't have those records? Because, at this point in time, we could be 30 years from a deregulation point. And I think that Regina really left open that question. Prior to Regina, and I think that we just had this conversation last week or maybe the week before, Christina, you could do what's called bridge the gap. So you could take the rents subsequent to the deregulation point and build forward. That, I think, at best now is a questionable methodology of building to a deregulation. And I'm unaware of any court case which says, yes, you can do this, or no, that you can't. I think that what Regina says, and we've also discussed this, is that it really narrows what the definition of fraud is. So fraud is not, in my opinion, not having records going back to the Clinton administration. Fraud is making up tenants. Fraud is engaging in an illusory prime tenancy. Fraud is egregious acts. So I think what the rule is today is that where you can't prove a deregulation, you end up with a rent-stabilized apartment at the rent in effect 6 years ago, plus increases or waivers from that point.
And would the overcharge calculation just be based upon the rent 6 years ago?
If no,
or there's no overcharge at all, it's just a reset in the rent.
I think that really remains to be seen. But what I think, based on the language set forth in Regina, I think what will happen based on the language set forth in Regina is that you get increases or waivers from that point in time, from 6 years ago.
So how are you advising your clients in this scenario?
That they may end up with a lot of rent-stabilized apartments at pretty high rents.
Right. So, but that's a hypothetical.
It's the best we can do now.
And
It's the most reliable hypothetical, which, listen, the way the system is established, I'll take a status challenge.
Mm-hmm. For
If
sure,
I
it's
can
the
get-
overcharge.
If I can get the rent, I'll take a status challenge. One of the reasons, and maybe this is my wishful thinking, one of the reasons why I just feel like I can convince a justice to believe that the reconstruction method should survive is because if I have leases or I have ledgers that's showing that there was a tenant in place, a fully signed executed lease, this is real history of paperwork about a building that should be looked at. It should be looked at. I realize that, the bridge the gap, the reconstruction, the gross up method, it's been tried and denied. But I think there is some room, and I actually have an easier time making a recommendation to a client where I have a lease file from 30 years ago that's this thick. I'm like, that says something. We will have something. If they decide to open up a statute of limitations because I'm fraud, at least I would have some lease records.
And I think in that situation, Christina, you would almost inevitably avoid a finding of fraud. But
Without a doubt.
Without
We agree on that.
We agree on that. but I
we
think,
got one that you agree on.
but I think this remains an open question after Regina, whether or not you can use fair market leases to build to a deregulation. And it's just an open question at this point, where I think that it really becomes, when you say you take a status challenge, I think that really becomes problematic when clients, and this probably goes to you guys, want to do value add construction or value add renovations on units that are being treated as fair market. At that point, if that's what you're dealing with, you have that 6-year window where a client could really get into a significant amount of overcharge trouble.
Yeah. Absent fraud, right? Absent knowledge, as Alex said, that we were trying to circumvent the rent stabilization law and code. Absent that, you are 6 years with the worst case scenario, a stabilized apartment.
Right.
That's
I mean, it's just crazy because currently right now I was hired and we are selling a 9% cap rate, 12-unit apartment building in Crown Heights that the lender took back. There is no registrations ever. The rents are not high. They're like $1,300, $1,400 a month. And the reason why it's a 9 cap is because I don't want to get into this vacuum of how do I even prove that the rent is $1,300? So there's the best deals in the marketplace are the ones where maybe everybody is kind of avoiding because of this perceived risk where, it would behoove, anybody to how do you disprove that the rent shouldn't be $1,300? It's not like it's $5,000. This is a bridge the gap type of normal historical type of anecdote. But those, if you're investors out there and you want to, kind of play a little bit on the margins, the best deals are the ones that don't have perfect paperwork from the Clinton administration.
Have you ever seen a perfect building with no hair? Because I haven't.
All my clients.
Right, so there's this
perfect hair
avatar
in the market is yours.
I appreciate that today. Coming from you, that's a big compliment.
But on the deregulated apartments that are post 2015, right? And we all have clients who have deregulated apartments post 2015, pre HSTPA. That's a different scenario, is it not?
Are you referring to the Altman? The
Yeah,
moments of Altman?
right.
Started to get weird in 2015.
That no longer exists.
So I will say many attorneys, I'm not sure if Christina took this position or not. I don't think we were speaking in 15. But many attorneys said that the outgoing tenant's rent needed to be over the threshold in order to deregulate. That was false when that opinion was given, and it is even more false now. There are a series of appellate term Supreme Court and DHCR cases which say that as long as your incoming tenant is over a threshold, the apartment is deregulated. So I actually have a client who was with a different law firm years ago who had about 30 apartments across their portfolio that they were treating as rent stabilized with preferential rents that were in fact deregulated. So, you're able to create hundreds of thousands of dollars in realized revenue and realized rent by just by really just auditing your portfolio and trying to find rents that are over the deregulation threshold, absent of J51, of course. Right?
That's certainly an area of law where I completely agree with Alex. And when he gives me his spreadsheet and he says, this apartment should be fair market, I'm like, Yahtzee, we agree.
Why do you guys just have the same spreadsheet?
Yeah,
do all the attorneys get together?
Go like you're representing the buyer, you're representing the seller on one deal, and then the next deal, the next day, it's the inverse. Can't you guys just work out? This is what we tell attorneys.
ChatGPT do treble damage?
Yeah.
This is why there's so much ambiguity. They're always going to have jobs.
Are you guys familiar with this new company that's out there that's for the insurance purposes that are insuring
DHCR overcharge insurance?
There's a new company that's in the marketplace.
You told me. Someone from Marcus.
You
told me about that.
You told me about
this.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's a new company that we're actually meeting with next week.
Okay.
Which should be interesting for the market. Extra insurance that you need on buildings now. So we got to underwrite that.
I mean, I just always think if it was this easy to get overcharges, I don't know why every ambulance chaser attorney wouldn't be on their yachts right now. I just think at the end of the day, there is some rule of law, and you don't want to be the exception to the rule and be the 1% that gets caught, and that's, what risk, assessment's all about. But, I think the longer this goes on, the more the 6-year look back. I mean, rents have been frozen since 2019. That's 4 years. I mean, how much longer are we going to talk about what's a legal rent and not?
Let's mix it up for a second. Who has the best tenant story?
Oh my gosh!
Come on, we have to have something.
I'm going to defer to Christina on this.
Really?
I mean, Where do I begin? I'm trying to think of
What's
any
the biggest
present
buyout
day.
that you paid a tenant?
I did a
7 figures?
very nice buyout of a bird watcher who was paying $190 a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you 1099 them at the end of the year? Do they get?
That's
They
up
have to
to
pay
my
taxes.
client.
Do they have to pay taxes?
I'm
on
not
that?
a tax attorney.
Maybe
But
they want to buy
yes,
some
I mean,
bonus
buyouts are
depreciation deal?
taxable to a
Taxable.
degree.
You know what's interesting though, Christina, I don't know if you've had the same experience. Since 2019, I think the buyout market has gotten smaller by volume.
Clearly.
By volume.
Yeah.
But the buyouts, at least that I've done since 19, are almost all 7-figure buyouts because the people that you're buying out
Are the last.
tenants there. So, you know,
I do want to make a plug for the buyout era, right? Because, and this is probably very controversial amongst tenant advocates, but when I look back to, really nice buyouts, people were able, I remember one story specifically where a young woman who didn't have a partner but desperately wanted a family was able to get in vitro
Mhm.
with the buyout,
Oh,
and
of course.
now has a 7-year-old, and we
course.
exchange cards at the holidays. And so
Nice.
it could be life-changing money for a lot of people. I realize there are protections that need to be in place, right? When a
Sure.
tenant has an attorney for a buyout, that is the best buyout I'll do all day long. I want to have an attorney on the other side of the table to make sure that there is no overreaching
Right, of
on the
course.
tenant.
The headline in June of 2019 should have been billions or hundreds of millions of tenant equity
that's
wiped
exactly
off the
Sean,
table.
trillions.
This is the only
Yeah, I mean-
thing that a lot of these people had
Yeah.
was the ability, when they wanted to enter into a conversation. And certainly there should be certain rules around a
Yeah.
minimum buyout allowance, send it to HPD, have
Yeah.
it papered correctly,
Yeah.
no harassment, throw the harassers in jail. We all agree on that.
Yeah.
But this is what should be in the lobby of every building. Like, you were stolen from. You had this inherent equity that, and of course, a lot of people used to buy homes in Middle Village. I mean, these apartments are old. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
hopefully, we can change the narrative and at least unlock, the keys to financial freedom for some people when they want, when they're tired of walking up a 6-story walk up and they're 75 years old. Give me a break.
100% that. And also that these apartments act to be handcuffs. People
Correct.
don't make life changes.
Correct.
They don't get married. They just make sure that they can preserve their $700 a month.
They,
Some tenants
they
are really-
pass it down like generation to
Essentially.
generation,
And that,
right? Like the
yeah.
same way you might pass down like a family heirloom, like
It's an asset.
it's an heirloom into many of
Very
these
true,
families
Seth.
where as the rents continue to rise because there's no supply as a result of our own doing here, the rents go up and
Yeah.
now they're actually in a worse position every year because they can't afford moving and building equity. And now that their equity is gone, they basically had, to your point, like effectively a line of credit that was available like at any moment in time that they can
they
go
had a
to.
retirement account.
They had a retirement
Retirement
The
account.
laws impacted the
And-
tenants just as much
And as the
impacted
values of the
landlords.
real estate went up and the values of the apartment went up, their retirement account increased in value, right? And now that's basically gone.
Yeah, and there's one other sort of unintended consequence of HSTPA that I always like to try and highlight is the disappearance of several trades, plumbers, cabinet makers, appliance suppliers, everything you think about to renovate an apartment, that was a real industry. One guy who's renovating, 50 apartments a year is supporting a family on that.
Well,
And
yeah.
that disappeared overnight.
And the tax revenues will fall. It takes a long time to burn a city this
I
great, but
It's starting to,
what
right? It
predates
has already,
We
yeah.
saw,
Yeah.
right, the headlines.
Yeah.
when
the
there's
tax-
foreclosures, no one paying the taxes. These rent rolls are severely damaged.
Yeah,
right
and the
now.
taxes
This
go
is
straight to the
an
public
industry in
schools,
distress.
right? And all the service providers, right? Cops, firefighters, teachers, that many of which are actually tenants in these buildings, right? And unfortunately, those services, right? It all comes
Yeah.
down to money.
Can you guys give us some, like, our listeners, some glimmer of hope on what's going on? Any updates? Anything that we can know
Definitely.
about what's going on in the updates of the rent laws? Who wants to go first?
Go for it.
I think there'll be no good cause. Agree?
Agree.
Agree.
Ooh.
I think there'll probably will be unit combos. I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I know that's not a glimmer of hope, but we did expect them.
Well, wait. There are unit combos.
No.
Yeah.
The unit combo restrictions, I think, are going to go into effect, but they certainly haven't gone into effect as quickly as
Okay.
we thought that they would. I think that there's going to be, and Christina, I don't know if you agree with me, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on politicians to change IAI rules in the probably mid-term future. We're both relatively small shops. I probably have clients who are holding over 100 units vacant. And I've toured some of these units. I've got a client, West Side, has a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, perfect for a family of 3 or 4. That's just he's not doing anything with it. He's holding it vacant. And I think that you're going to see that multiplied. You do see it multiplied over, tens of thousands of apartments. Something's going to have to give eventually, I think. I think that sooner or later, some of the more progressive, politicians in New York are going to have to recognize that.
I completely agree. The new acronym, we're going to forget about HSTPA. We're going to not give it so much attention, and we're going to focus on LRHRA, which is the Local Regulated Housing Restoration Adjustment, which is a bill that's currently in our Senate and Assembly and getting some obviously negative attention from.
Is that Chip's bill? I'm sorry.
Chip.
It's all of New York.
Chippy. It's Chippy. Okay.
It's obviously it's the necessary bill to bring these units back online.
And what does it say? Like
in a nutshell, essentially, it says that all of the mandates that are coming down the pike from all the municipal agencies, the DOB about lead adjustment and HPD, lead abatement, asbestos abatement, bring a unit that has been locked for 10 years because of automatic renewals of stabilization, and it turns over, we're going to be allowed to, our clients, your clients, are going to be allowed to bring those units to a one-time reset that matches the market. So the perimeter is a 1-mile radius where you can look to comparable apartments and bring that unit to a market rate.
And it's not tied to like a $15,000
there's no
budget allowance?
There's no actual expenditure required. I've heard that lead and asbestos alone can run easily $30,000.
And electrifying the
That's
heating
another great
supply.
point,
So
Shaun. Thank
this
you.
is a way to enforce new code that's needed to improve the quality of housing, allow rents to go down because you're creating more housing, increase supply, rents get lowered, and get these 60,000, 70,000 apartments back on the market, which will then allow people to pay more property taxes, which allows everyone to pay the social welfare net that the city needs to take care of people.
And they're rent stabilized apartments.
They will
So
be
it
rent
helps
stability.
that whole
It helps
quota.
that mandate as well.
All right, so we're hopeful by June 8th, I believe they're still in session, that this will get passed through. If not, after summer recess, maybe in January of 2024.
I mean, they do come back in January 24. Obviously they're going to go home and try to get elected again. I'll keep my opinions on certain senators who may not get reelected if they can't deliver good cause. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to deliver good cause. Will that affect their electability? I can only pray.
How will this be governed though? Like, who's going to oversee this? DHCR? How are you going to set the comps? Like, what's the process?
I mean, I have this sort of nirvana vision that 20 years ago there should have been a portal for IAIs. Like, we wouldn't be here
Exactly.
if there was just a portal. Like, let's upload our renovation records and the DHCR can tell us what our rent
So
is.
if you were mayor for one day, is that what you would change?
That would be my main initiative. Yeah.
What would you do if you were mayor for one day?
I mean, I'd pick him for deputy mayor, actually,
thank
and
you.
you would run finance. Seth,
I'll do.
We'll figure
the
something out.
best looking guy. I don't know.
Wow.
Alex.
We knew you liked
I was
it.
going to say, I was going to say.
No,
But speaking of what the mayor should do, it's interesting. You asked about a crazy tenant story. So, there was a bill that was enacted relatively recently. Governor signed it that allowed HPD, that allowed a landlord to collect more than the legal regulated rent if they entered into a regulatory agreement with HPD and they received a voucher from either Section 8 or FEPS. So here's what's absolutely insane. I have clients that I have a client that has 30 SRO units in the Upper West Side, and he wants to give them all away he wants to rent them to homeless New Yorkers or income restricted New Yorkers. His legal regulated rents on those apartments are less than $800 a piece. FEP's Section 8 are willing to pay close to $1,700 a pop. The money's there. HPD will not enter into a regulatory agreement with me. Isn't that insane? I mean, isn't that the definition of insanity, right? I was reading, I don't know if it was the Post or the Times, they can't find housing for all of these migrants that are coming up. They're scouring buildings. And here you have landlords coming to the city and saying, take my units, I'll give them to you. But you have this artificial, made-up legal regulated rent that keeps these units off the market. Yeah. So I don't know if it's a function of bureaucracy or the lack of political will, but I think Mayor Adams is actually a very pragmatic and practical guy. I think I happen to like him. I think there's a disconnect here between what he's saying and what his agencies are doing.
Agreed.
Interesting. And those are vacant SROs?
Yep. Vacant SRO units.
Wow.
I've petitioned HPD to allow us to house Ukrainian refugees, and you don't even get a response. You finally got a response, and they basically admitted that there's interns running the show over there. And they're understaffed. They can't get to it. It's quite alarming what is going on in the underbelly of our government, but hopefully it's at the point where it's getting so bad that eventually the vacuum is, okay, let's actually get some solutions, even if it comes from the progressives. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing.
If you were mayor for one day, what would you do?
If I was the mayor for one day?
Yeah, for one day, and you had a mini superpower for a day, what would you do? Could be anything. It doesn't have to be related to housing. It could be get a reservation at the hottest Greek restaurant, whatever. I don't know. What would you do?
It gets in there anyway.
Probably.
I don't know what I would do. I'd fix the subways. Yeah, I know what I would do. I'd get rid of congestion pricing entirely. That's what I would do.
Sounds like a real commuter.
That's a guy that drives into Manhattan. That's what I would do. That would be my superpower.
I know that
I like the portal idea better.
Well, they did it. They just did it 30 years too late.
Yeah.
Riney, Shaun, what would you do if you were mayor for one day?
I'm just so sick of on Sundays seeing trash in the ground. It's like, this is pretty common sense. Put more, get some wood, just make some more trash bins, so that there's no trash on the ground. It's very simple. We're in New York City. It's like you go to European countries and people are bike laning, everything's clean. It's like, why can't we be better? This is simple.
Why do we have to live
Why do we need a rat star? Just get more garbage, facilities so they don't overflow on Sunday.
Yeah, Joey,
it's a big. I agree with that.
Big problem. It's a simple problem. It just shows the
Joey,
lack of attention to detail.
It's a good question. I think I would simplify life and get rid of these rent laws. No, I'm joking. I don't know. You got to come back to me on that.
Christina?
Yeah, for sure. We need to increase housing supply. We need to increase affordable housing. We do have an affordable housing crisis. I mean, even if somehow there was a reasonable trade-off where 50,000 of these locked apartments get allocated to our kindergarten teachers, get allocated to police officers, firefighters, social workers. And, it's so basic. It makes my head spin. This is a supply and demand issue. We're tying up 421A. I mean, I'm a real estate nerd, so it would have to be, would be my main point.
What's the latest on 421A and what you're hearing?
It's in the bundle, right, of what Hochul can and can't do. I mean, her budget's over. I don't see anything on the housing coming out by June 8th.
Because of the budget.
Well, the budget's done. I just, she typically at the end of session is when the horse trading starts. And I believe that the progressives were holding out for good cause. Every indicator, even the speaker, Cousins, came out today and said she was very lukewarm on it. It's not happening. And so I can't see how they're going to pull 421A out as a trade. That we can't come up with a single affordable housing in the greatest city in the world is disheartening at best. But there is hope. I mean, there's the challenge that Chip and RSA is hoping that the Supreme Court will grant certiorari. We'll know about that in September. Jay Neveloff, I saw last night at an industry event, and he has his own challenge just on HSTPA. And there is some common sense that is happening. I do think that there might be some kind of way to get those units back online. I think that the more reasonable members upstate realize that these units have to come back on.
Yeah, the timing of this Supreme Court, right, responding to the CHIP lawsuit is coming in, beginning of fall or right?
Exactly right.
October or something like that?
Yeah.
So from our perspective, from a deal perspective, you're talking to a buyer today and they're putting a bid on a rent-regulated building. They're going to negotiate a contract and they're going to close on it 3 or 4 months from now. And then 30 days after they buy it, the Supreme Court is going to say if they're going to take the case or not.
Yeah.
And more people haven't actually spoken about that really openly, and that's
because it's like talking about a pipe dream. I mean,
is it though? But you could buy something and then 30 days later,
it's in the horizon, right? We're not a couple years
literally you buy it, you don't even collect the rents yet for the next month, and then the Supreme Court says we're either going to take it or not, and you would have to imagine there's going to, regardless of the impact, positive or negative, there's going to be some impact on something that you just spent millions of dollars on, and I think that's something that we should just be talking about, or people should be aware of that in a way. Right. And it's not.
Christina, what's your take on the?
I mean, I have a feeling that let's assume the Supreme Court takes the case and they find that the system that was implemented during the war has outlived its useful life, right? It's only 70, 80 years later. I have a feeling that anyone in a stabilized apartment would be able to remain for their lifetime. I don't think that they would, cause a mass eviction. I think that we would have, they would have the right to stay, but think about the value of that unit. I mean, just the mere...
Tenant buyouts are back.
No, tenant buyouts are back.
Tenant payouts
but
are back.
I was thinking even with the LRHRA, what that would inject into your guys' life. I mean, you guys would have been, or could be, completely flooded with... I mean, buildings would trade at such...
We're already flooded
veracity.
with opportunities to sell. The problem is just getting them sold. It's the demand from sellers. I get 10 calls from sellers to every one buyer today. So that part of our business is not, waning at all. It's just how do you facilitate a transaction? I have to sit down with people and say sometimes I don't think your building sellable at any price because of some of these issues we've raised today.
Got it.
Are there any other ways to clean up those issues? Because we're running into it at every deal. What's the magic pill?
Time. Sell at a high cap rate. I mean, that's
new buyer and new lenders. I think you're entering this new phase of the market.
I think so. I would agree with Seth, and I would also agree that pricing. It's going to come down to pricing.
But I'm talking about on the diligence perspective, right?
But it's all a function of price, right? If it gets cheap enough, someone's going to be willing to create the story to themselves, their investors, their lenders, et cetera, that. Look, yes, there's risk. Here's what it is. I spoke to this attorney. I didn't like what they said, so I called a different one, and they gave me a better answer.
True, and that's happening.
No, but that's a new opportunity for new people and new lenders to enter the market. And you still are in New York City, where there's value no matter what it is, right? If you have real estate in New York, there's a value to it.
I have one more situational question for both of you that I'm dealing with personally. I have a building in Greenpoint, and it's rent stabilized. The tenants would like to pay more. They're voluntarily reaching out to me to use the backyard. Me to spruce up the backyard. They want to use the backyard. Am I legally allowed to, allow them to pay $500 more for the backyard if that's what they want, or is that just... Can't do it. Can't provide any more services to tenants.
Sounds to me like an amenity.
Are these stabilized?
Ancillary services.
Stabilized
High rent stabilized, yeah.
I think you could probably charge them for it, right, as an ancillary service.
Okay, so maybe I'll counsel with you because they're the ones attacking me. They're like, we want to use the backyard. We'll pay more.
Harassment.
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to give it to them. Sure. I mean, but if I got to clean up the backyard, it costs money and so on and so forth. So I remember hearing this term of ancillary services, and I just didn't want to get caught into some, overcharge.
I would keep it out of the lease transaction,
right.
Gotcha.
and also, I've heard the same with storage. You can create a license agreement between you and your tenant to give them bike storage.
Well, we're selling probably never take it back.
Right.
Yeah.
So it
Well,
runs with
everything
the
is-
tenancy. I understand that.
Well, a lot of these stabilized units have become storage, right? And tenant and landlords are charging for it, or giving bike services, or turning into bike rooms, or
Yeah.
So
We have.
Yeah, you got to
Yeah.
get creative, right?
Think about it. If your rent is $500, then you can just store your winter clothes in there and actually live in
Yeah.
Palm Beach or something.
Yeah,
So-
anything that doesn't fit in your Palm Beach house.
What
That's
about
right.
what about furnishing apartments? You have a rent stabilized apartment. If you furnish it, does that usurp the legal rent? Not at all. If I
So-
put Murphy beds and furnish the unit or furnishings.
If I'm not mistaken, a landlord cannot collect more than the legal regulated
Correct,
rent. A tenant can sublease a furnished apartment for, I believe it's 10% more than the legal regulated
Got
rent.
it. Okay.
Right.
The only place where a landlord can actually do better by furnishing an apartment is if they've created a new apartment and they're renting it for the first time. I've had clients that are able to rent for signidigantly higher by renting that unit furnished. They
Right.
can set a higher first rent that way.
Right. Smart. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up here in a second, but I want to have one last fun question. If you could have dinner with any single person, dead or alive, who would it be?
it's just for our guests.
Speed round.
This is such fangirl, but I mean, probably like Dave Matthews. Like I'm
Yeah,
a
I
big
love
Dave
Dave,
Matthews fan, like from back in the day, and a huge music fan.
That's awesome. What do you think Dave would order?
You sound what a radio voice on that one. What about you, Alex?
Oh boy. I am past. Come back to me. Come back to me.
Shaun?
Well, I would like to sit down with Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Joe?
Roger Federer.
Oh,
I'm a big tennis fan.
it's a good one.
Yeah,
I mean,
That
you
is-
just met Larry Silverstein. Like,
It's
who
true.
else
Yeah,
is
yeah,
there?
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
true.
and nothing gets better than Larry Silverstein introduced me as Joey One Cap.
I really,
What did he
that was
do?
a great night.
My nickname. How do you not know the nickname?
I didn't hear what you said.
Joey One
Cap.
He hasn't,
Oh.
he hasn't heard one cap in quite a while.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. It's yeah.
Years, huh?
Do you think he's sitting around a table right now thinking I got to introduce Joey? Just
I think he is actually. I think we really connected. We really connected. We had a special bond.
Who's
We have a
yours?
lot of-
Who would I have there? Maybe my great uncle Jack, who died 20 years ago, who I don't, who fought in the war, and I didn't really know. He died 25 years ago or something like that. What I do remember about him was he put ice in his cereal with milk, and I don't know. That's
you do that as well?
no, I don't do that. I don't know
With
why.
kids?
No, I don't. It's just one of those things. You know how you
He
just
liked
remember
really cold milk.
Yeah, he liked really cold milk, and that's one of these quirky
I
things
think you should come to the jungle and do some ayahuasca with me. And we'll go see him.
Maybe, yeah, but I don't know.
On that note, I think we gotta wrap up.
We could probably fix the real estate problem
Yeah,
with
I
some
think it'd
ayahuasca.
be cool to hear more about
I want to hear Alex's though.
I guess I'll go with Bruce Springsteen.
Oh,
I guess I'll go with
nice.
Bruce.
Springsteen.
Yeah.
There
I'm
you go.
sure
Yo,
we
you
could
a
probably
big,
come
you're
up
a
with
big fan.
a couple.
I think that's the last time real music was made.
I really thought you were going to say somebody else, but
Who did you think I was going to say? No. That's how I want to end. That's how I want to end.
With that, we will wrap up. I will encourage all of our listeners, if you have any situational questions, obviously this is a very gray and nuanced market, but this is your invitation to reach out to Christina or Alex for any direct conversations. And if you'd like to learn more about what we have on the market for sale, I'll put that plug in there now. And it was a great time this afternoon. We'll catch you on the next wave.